Our brain isn't a filing cabinet. It's very messy, it's very interconnected.
Is it us misunderstanding what we really need from these tools in the first place?
Your previous thoughts and work and effort being processed by this external cognitive entity, that's like literally a second brain. That would be incredible.
This new feature set does unlock something that I've been waiting for.
It's fun to organize your stuff, right? If you organize information, you will make more money, you will be happier.
History has shown us this is not true.
If you think that you need a good writing app to write your book, you're just wrong.
Since the rise of the computer, humans have been gripped by the idea of having a second brain. But has reality held up to that promise? How many people spend more time organizing their second brains instead of leveraging the information within them? How many people constantly look for a better to-do app instead of actually checking the to-dos that they're organizing? And how many people have an endless stream of data that they'd love to one day process, but they just don't have the right tools or time to do so? Due to the structured, directive nature of computers to date, computers have been a shell of maybe the second brain that we've long hoped for. Still incredibly powerful, but also requiring discrete instruction from the director. But within the last year, consumer AI has shown up to the party, now capable of processing simple language prompts and interfacing with unstructured data, possibly fundamentally changing this game. So today we chat with writer Nat Eliason. Nat has tried the full gamut of knowledge management tools, but he's also written prolifically for years, read 250 plus books, created courses, grown viral social accounts, ran an agency, and even recently inked a book deal. And yet, even Nat questions the productivity promise of the current toolkit. So, can AI change things and enable our second brains to finally work for us? Let's find out. As a reminder, the content here is for informational purposes only. Should not be taken as legal, business, tax, or investment advice, or be used to evaluate any investment or security, and is not directed at any investors or potential investors in any A16Z fund. For more details, please see a16z.com/disclosures. All right, Nat, great to have you on the line. Great to be talking about knowledge management. At one point, you were writing a lot about productivity, knowledge management, and that's one of the reasons that we have you here. And tell me about why you got into that space.
I think at one point I adopted the belief, as many do, that the more I learned about productivity and the more knowledge I collected, the more financially successful or happy or whatever I would be. And ended up going very hard down that track, I think, as a lot of people do once they get that idea in their head. Something with the tools just clicked very well for me, where something about the way I was using it wasn't as immediately intuitive to people. And then in particular with Rome, for those who remember that it was really like a mania, I think. I just got very lucky that I was super early on it, was using it before a lot of other people. And I was one of the first people with a small to medium-sized audience who talked about it. And then I think that helped people with much larger audiences pick it up.
Tell me a little bit more about, you're saying you seem to have this intuition about how to use them, and then you shared that with other folks. What was it delivering for you and then subsequently others?
You know, that's a good question, because I'm not sure that I could honestly say all of the effort has delivered a compensatory amount of value in the sense that I think that this is just like a very common mistake, or like causation versus correlation thing that people make, including myself, which is that they look at something that somebody does who they look up to, and they assume that, oh, because they do that thing, that's how they're able to do this other thing that I like and respect. Because they wake up at 5 a.m., that's how they could start this business. When it might might just as well be the opposite, in the sense that because they're the type of person who can start that business, they also like to wake up at 5 a.m., right? And I feel like I might actually be more in the later camp, where even as a kid, I very much enjoyed finding interesting bits of knowledge and then sharing them with people or trying to explain them. And so almost like this kind of digital magpie. I enjoy just collecting shiny bits of information. And to the extent that it's helped with writing, most of it hasn't. The only thing that I could say definitely has really helped is a habit that I've had for 12 or 13, 14 years now of like taking notes from the books that I'm reading. And so I used to do this on Kindle. Now I do it on physical books and use Readwise to extract the highlights. But the medium that I organize those highlights in doesn't seem to matter because I had them in text files at one point. I had them in Evernote. I had them in Notion. I had them in Roam. I had them in back in Notion, right? Like I've moved them around. I've lost a lot of the formatting and additional annotations so many times that it almost doesn't matter.
Like you're almost saying it could be on a stone tablet, and as long as you have that there, or is it maybe the searchability? There's only maybe a few functions that you need in order for it to be useful, not all of the feature set.
Well, yes, I think it's really the searching, the indexing, and the collecting that are very helpful, but pretty much all of the other features are often like get in the way or become distractions or give you this sense of productivity, right? Like, oh, I'm doing all of these, I'm organizing my knowledge. And, you know, you probably should be writing or like playing with your kids or doing something else, right?
Yeah.
But expanding on that, the thing that's really been helpful is the actual reading the books, right? Like, I wish I had spent more time reading more books instead of continuing to hyper optimize my highlights from the books I had already read.
Maybe there's something meta here, though, where to your point, it's like because you feel like you're being productive with the notes that you take within these knowledge management tools, it makes you want to read more books because you feel like they're more useful. But at the same time, it does seem like there is this false understanding of what you're getting from these tools. But one thing that I noticed was when you and a few other creators saw Rome, like you said, there really was this almost like mania, and maybe something behind that mania, at least it felt to me, was as though there was an unlock, as though the prior knowledge management tools were lacking something that this now provided. So maybe you could speak to that experience.
Yeah, it's funny because this all happened at an interesting time where I had gone through Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain a couple of years before. And when I went through it, I was having these conversations with him about how much I hated Evernote because it really forced you into this hierarchical way of organizing your information. And so you had a folder for home or whatever, and then you're putting your notes about your house in there, and you have a folder for books, and you're putting all your book notes in there. But pretty much every piece of knowledge should live in multiple places. Mm-hmm. And you could also do tags and stuff, but the tags felt clunky. And so what was exciting to me about Rome when I saw it was it introduced this more of a like knowledge graph, which is really, I think, how we think about things, right? Like that's more of how our brain works. Our brain isn't a filing cabinet. It's very messy. It's very interconnected. And it felt like it fit that much better for me. And that's what made me so excited about it. And I think made so many other people excited about it. We kind of take for granted today, if you're getting into knowledge management today, almost every tool has this, right? Notion very quickly adopted this same, interconnected backlink structure that Rome popularized. And I think that's great because I use it in Notion all the time now. That's the main tool that I use. And that feature in particular was what felt so magical because to the point that we talked about earlier, very few things in these tools are actually useful for improving the creative output, which is I think what you're really optimizing for by using them. Search is very useful and the capture is very useful. And I do think that these bidirectional relationships between bits of information are super useful as well, so that you can log a few notes on something or log a few connections on something. And as long as it's connected to 2 or 3 other things in your second brain or whatever you want to call it, it will be very easy to resurface it later, much easier than if you have to pick an arbitrary folder to put it into, at least for me.
You have to remember the route, right? You're saying with Evernote, you have to remember, oh, there's this thing hidden in, 4 layers of folders, and I have to remember it's there, versus you're saying the interconnectivity allows you to surface it more easily, almost like stumble upon it, would you say? Or
a little bit more like that. And the thing that I liked about it too was that Evernote required, or I should say any hierarchical file system requires very deliberate placement of each piece of information. You have to think about it a lot, where you put it. It might not seem like you do, but you kind of do, because you're saying, okay, in 10 years, if I don't know I need this piece of information, how do I accidentally re-find it? Yeah. Whereas with a much more like widespread hyperlinked knowledge graph style, you can kind of just like slap 10 different relationships onto it, and you'll probably be able to find it again in the future.
That's so interesting. I was filing something away because I'm still in ancient times. I still use Evernote, but I was filing something away, and I had this thought as I was doing so yesterday of just, I will never see this again.
Well, I had a few people reach out to me over the last week or two, and they said, hey, I need to migrate all of my stuff into a new tool. What do you recommend? And I said, well, like, don't migrate anything. Just like start using a new tool, and then for the next 3 months, see which pieces of information you end up needing, and then go migrate them. But what you will probably find is that you can delete 95 to 99% of everything you have in Evernote or Notion or whatever, and never feel that pain for the rest of your life.
It's so true. And in a way, it reflects on the fact that so many of us are digital hoarders, where if we did the same thing with physical items, we'd end up in these homes, just, boxes and boxes and boxes. And in a way, because it costs so little and it is kind of out of sight, out of mind, we do it digitally. But that kind of brings me to this question, Nat. Do you think that maybe the way that these knowledge management tools haven't quite lived up to their promise, is that just because we misunderstand the way our own brains work and what we really need, and we kind of convince ourselves that we need these knowledge management tools? Or is it a facet of these tools not having the right technology, maybe the right feature set yet? And obviously this will eventually dovetail into our conversation around AI. But I want to get a sense of, like, is it us misunderstanding what we really need from these tools in the first place?
I think it might be more of a false promise issue, because I think if you look at, say, the Notion marketing or the Evernote marketing, they advertise themselves as a wiki, as a digital filing cabinet, and they do those things very well, right? They allow you to collect and organize information. And I think the false promise that many of us believe or have bought into or whatever is that if you organize information, you will write better articles, you will make more money, you will be happier, you will get all of these benefits from it, right? And that one I think is that one I think is probably just not true. I make this analogy all the time that 99.9% of the best books ever written were written on a typewriter or by hand. Like, if you think that you need a good writing app to write your book, you're just wrong. It's just not true.
History has shown us this is not true.
Exactly. So I do think that there is this big element of the other thing they're delivering is fun, right? And we don't we don't like to admit that the reason we read productivity books or watch motivational YouTubes or stuff is because it's fun and makes us feel good, not because it's going to produce any tangible benefit in our lives. And that's part of what they're delivering too. Like, it's fun to organize your stuff, right?
If we think about things along this spectrum of like actual utility that these tools are indeed bringing, and then this false promise, and maybe everyone and their own experience with knowledge management fits somewhere along that spectrum. Tell me a little bit more about how you've maybe moved closer to that utility side of the spectrum.
I really think the next big utility is going to be a note-taking tool that offers custom GPT or whatever embeds as a service for your knowledge graph. I've seen people do it. Dan Schipper has that great project he did where he put all of Andrew Huberman's podcast transcripts into a GPT embed model, and then you can just query it with anything you want to know, and it feeds you back Huberman's answers from podcasts, right? Theoretically, any note-taking app should be able to offer that as a service, where maybe you pay, I'd pay like $1,000 or more for this, right? Very happily, where I could just say, okay, here are my notes from, it's got to be like 400 or 500 books now, thousands of articles, every little like idea I've written down over the last 10, 15 years. Here's all of it. I just want you to like index it. And then as I start writing, just give me little like pop-ups along the side, or when I ask for them, give me little pop-ups that say, oh, you had this idea, or oh, this idea from this book, or this idea from this article, or whatever. Like, these are all relevant to what you're doing right now, because I'm pretty sure we can actually already do that with the tools that are available on the market. Nobody's just created a consumer side version of it. And that would be the point where that's like literally a second brain, right? That's literally your previous thoughts and work and effort being processed by this external cognitive entity and then fed back to your like current working mind or whatever to enhance what you're trying to do without you having to go look for it. And that would be incredible. Like, that would be so useful. I would use that nonstop every day.
If you imagine a tool like this where an AI can parse your personalized, unstructured data, it can be proactive, and it can surface things as you need them, what do you think this unlocks?
The valuable thing is the ideas, but everybody receives ideas in different ways. And so, for example, like one thing I realized about myself at some point is that I have a very hard time processing auditory information. Like, I don't remember it. It just doesn't really imprint for me. But when I read things, they stick with me really, really well. And so if I read a book, I can remember a ton from it. But if I listen to an audiobook, I don't remember anything. Some people prefer the long form essay style. Like, some people would prefer a short form video of the idea, right? And so if you have an idea and you can turn it into one of those forms, something that's trained on you should be able to help you produce those other forms of your work to help that idea reach the most people possible. And we're seeing something else in tandem with the potential for that, which is like platforms aren't really letting you use them as funnels anymore. Like, early internet marketing with social media 10 years ago or whatever, like your Facebook and your Twitter and whatever were all to drive traffic back to your site, right? Where you could get email signups or sales or whatnot. And it's way harder to do that now. So you actually want to create native stuff for each of those platforms for the people who want to spend time on those platforms, because that's what's going to get rewarded. But now you're like not creating one article, you're trying to create like 10 assets off of each idea, which is a huge time suck. And so it's interesting to think too, like, what would it look like if you had this kind of like content assistant who you train not only on all of your writing and stuff, but on your preferred format for short and long form videos, and train on your voice so that you can immediately create like a podcast from your articles and all of these things, so that you can be this like hyper distributed idea person. That world is not very far away. It's probably like less than 2 or 3 years out.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that won't be on the horizon. All right, Nat, this was fascinating. I love that you were so candid about this idea of knowledge management and maybe where it falls flat, maybe where it doesn't, especially given that you've been so present in this space. And so, yeah, this was really enjoyable. And I'm also looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for listening to the A16Z podcast. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe so that you are the first to get our exclusive video content. Or you can check out this video that we've hand selected for you.